Stays in the block. Jackson fires, and that will be intercepted in the end zone by Johnson. Taron Johnson. And only Jackson can stop him now. Too late to the end zone. Touchdown.
Oh, that's never going to get old. What a play. Okay, so what I want to talk about is should have expected this, right? Not just the Taron Johnson interception, but the dominant play by the Buffalo's defense, right? Coming into the Buffalo Bills Ravens game, we're seeing a lot of predictions like this. This is Sports Illustrated predicting Ravens 28, Bills 24. A lot of people had this as a an even match. One of the stories that we're being told is going into this game was that the Ravens have a dominant run offense, which is true, and the Bills have a weak running defense, and the Bills were likely to be overrun in this game. So here's from the Sports Illustrated, citing Lamar Jackson against the Titans, 136 yards, 179 yards passing, and Ravens having 236 total yards rushing, and their story tended to go on saying the Bills have a weak rushing defense, and so citing the Colts game with 163 yards, and then this statistic came up. Bills were ranked 17th in the league against the run, below average run defense, and so the story was Bills are in trouble. Ravens have this powerful running attack that was gonna be trouble for the Bills to handle, and it just wasn't true. It just didn't pan out. And so the question I want to look at is, could we see into this coming? The only person I know that really called this out, Greg Tom, said at Cover One, pointed out that the powerful rushing attack of the Ravens was likely to play well against some of the teams that were weaker that they had played, but not against the Bills that were a strong team. And so let's take a look at the Bills' rushing defense over the 2019 season. And so what I have here is a chart. On the y-axis is the number of yards in each game. On the x-axis is the week, going from week 1 through 17. And we're missing week 11 here because that was the bye week for the Bills. And so each dot corresponds to a game, and it's giving us the amount of yards achieved by the opponent that the Bills were playing against in the game. And you'll notice just up front, this is something you would have known if you're a Bills fan, that the Bills didn't have a particularly strong defense in the first portion of the year, but later on the different defense played much better. And so we see that with these lower rushing totals in the final portion of the year. And this played out in a number of dimensions. In the Bills game was these series of dominant wins that came at the end of the year. This shutdown rushing defense played a part in that. There were other components. The offense was on fire through that period too. So going into the playoffs, just looking at this chart, we could have expected, hey, the Bills' defense is pretty good against the run. So let's break this down a little further. What I've done is I've done a certain analysis here called switch point analysis. And so there's an algorithm, and we tell the algorithm, hey, we think that the Bills had two different rates at which they would give up rushing yardages, one that's early on, one that's later, and we let the algorithm determine what's the most probable point at which they switched from the early rate to the later rate, and we let the algorithm determine what that early rate and late rate are, and those are pretty much the average yards given up in those two different periods. And so what we get is this 95% confidence interval that there was a switch point that occurred right around the bye week, and we look at the rates. Early on, this early rate, everything up to the bye week, the Bills were giving up 135 yards per game, and this later rate at 94. And for comparison, here's the NFL average of 119 yards per game. So what we see is this early rate of 135. That's a below average run defense that the Bills had early on in the year. And in the later part of the year, what was a reasonably dominant run defense at giving up 94 yards per game on average. We break that down a little further or look at some more reference points. Here's the Colts run game. They were averaging 125 yards per game. And then the Ravens, probably the best running offense in the NFL at 192. So although we were told that the Bills were in trouble, what we should have expected is somewhere between this 94 yards per game and this 192 yards per game, somewhere in that bracket, that's where the Bills would have given up yards to the Ravens. And so let's look at what actually happened in the playoffs games. With these two lines here, this is versus the Colts. The Bills gave up 163 yards. And then versus the Ravens, they gave up 152 yards. Now, the Colts were a little bit more difficult of opponent because they were a multi-dimensional team in a number of ways. But the Ravens, Bills held them to 150 yards, and that's about what you would have expected if you understood the strong performance that the Bills had been putting in, this 94 yards per game average later on in the season. And if you dig even just a little further, we look at these two games here in these latter third of the season, and look at what happened in those games. And those are the games against the Broncos, where the Bills gave up 115 yards passing, and against the Patriots, where the Bills gave up 56 yards passing. So what happened in those two games is the Bills shut down the opponent's offense on their passing and gave up even a small amount of rushing yards. So those were strategic, probably looked like games from here, looked like games where the Bills said, we're going to shut down your offense and force you to run because we think you're not going to win that way. And Bills won, of course, by significant big margins in both of those games. So hope you enjoyed the analysis. Go Bills.